Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. I am super excited, thrilled, and I know you will be too, because we have a fascinating guest on the show today with a very relevant topic. Jon Conradt, most recently, the principal AI and machine learning scientist for Amazon. He also spent time at eBay, Google, Microsoft, which we'll get into a little bit, as well as Gallup. So, Jon, welcome to the show. So excited to have you.
Yeah, good morning.
Thank you. Well, good. Well, maybe let's dig into. We talked a little bit before we hopped on here about, we a lot of times we talk about servant leadership on the show here, but you talked about responsible AI and getting AI projects off the ground and what to you what responsible AI means. So maybe I don't know if we want to kick it off with that.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic, and it's one that uh, sort of had a lot of interest a little while ago, and then a bunch of the sort of big names in AI backed away from it and let go a lot of the people working on responsible AI, which is unfortunate. So, responsible AI is about the ethics of artificial intelligence. When you are going to build an AI system, you need an enormous amount of data. For example, maybe the entire internet, everything on the internet. And the people who provided that data, they didn't necessarily intend for their data to be used in this way,
Sure.
right? So you hear about lawsuits, people suing companies because their images ended up in an AI database or their books ended up in an AI database, and so far it turns out that those copyrighted materials aren't necessarily used. So
Okay.
copyright, as far as we could tell, was observed. But if you had like an Instagram account and you looked at the terms and conditions for that Instagram account, it allowed them to train models. Right, you didn't have a copyright on that kind of stuff for those things, and so as an AI researcher, there's an ethical standard that you need to voluntarily adhere to. That there might be data that's available to you that you don't want to use. But then once you're training the model, models are they're going to reflect the historic data. So, for example, I was reading a lawsuit that happened with a bank where the bank created a model that was going to help them find where do we put the next branch office. Seems like a great thing to do.
Absolutely.
And they trained the model on their historic data, like where had their banks done well in the past, where had their banks been in the past. And it turns out that that historic data reflected biases against certain communities in their city,
Okay.
right? There were neighborhoods that they didn't go into. And so you have these unbanked neighborhoods that were going to remain unbanked because the model's historic data, what the model was training, the model was learning, oh, we don't put banks among those people,
Uh-huh.
right? That's a terrible thing.
Right.
And it's an easy thing to miss because you're so concentrated on trying to make the model work really well. So, responsible AI has a variety of ethical considerations around how do we treat the data? How do we treat the people we got the data from? How do we deal with bias within the model itself? Um, how do we avoid things like the model running amok? Nobody wants that,
Right.
right? Um, and so I think it's a fascinating topic, and it's one that um, a lot of the big companies have, like I said, they've sort of backed away their efforts around this. Those ethical concerns got to be a problem and growing quickly and growing fast. Um, so anyway, yeah, I think it's a big deal. And when you think about being a servant leader, normally I think we concentrate on, well, how do I treat my employees or my direct reports? Like, what's the culture I'm building in the company?
Sure.
But for me, being a servant leader also means how am I treating all of those anonymous people whose data I now have,
Mm.
right? Am I respectful of that? You can buy amazing data. For example, there are companies where you can buy data where they have pinged people's car fobs, the thing you use to get into your car. That tells
Really?
you what brand of car it is and whatnot. And as you go into a building, they can ping that data and know, oh, someone who owns an Audi just walked into the building.
Wow.
And so that's useful data.
For
That's
sure.
really nice. Like, imagine you have, say, an entire auditorium, right? You have some sort of concert, and you can go back and you can say, hey, by the way, we should go talk to Ford, because it turns out 70% of the people who come to your concert drive a Ford.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, but is it ethical, right? I
Right.
mean, did everybody expect that you were going to learn what their car was because they happened to be in a room? So that's fantastic data for AIs, right? Those kinds of observations and interesting pieces of data are super useful when you're training a model for certain things, not necessarily for a chatbot, but for other goals. And it can be very seductive to, it's like, well, I'm not really invading their privacy, right? I don't know their license plate number. All I know is the make, model, and year of their vehicle, and that they were at a concert. Right? It's like, where is the line for you? And I think if you're going to be a servant leader, you're going to be more respectful of people's privacy. You're going to take the opportunity to ask kindly to use data instead of just stealing it, just grabbing everything that you can. And by the way, as you walk around, you are broadcasting an enormous amount of data. Your phone is, your watch is. If you have Apple AirTags, those things are broadcasting data. Like, you can ping those things and ask them all kinds of questions. We're not going to get away from that, right? That's going to be the reality we're going to be in forever now. But that doesn't mean that we can't be respectful of that data, right? And do the right thing, and try to help people and avoid the biases and dangers and downside of AI.
That's fascinating. So how do you train the models to be responsible AI?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, so one of the things that I think we misunderstand about AI is artificial intelligence, like these models, like, say, ChatGPT. When you're interacting with the website itself isn't the AI, right? There's an application that's drawing that website for you. And when you type things into it, what you type is goes through a whole lot of code, right? Because there's code that's looking for you asking naughty things, so it just drops that on the floor and doesn't answer naughty questions, right? But eventually it's going to go and provide that document to the AI. And at that last step, it's really about the same as the sum function in Excel.
Okay.
Everybody's probably used Excel, and everybody's probably used the sum function to add up some numbers, right? We're familiar with it, right?
Uh-huh.
You've got this function, and you give it a list of cells, maybe a column of data, and it produces the sum, the total. AI actually isn't much different from that in many respects. So with an AI, you have a document, you're providing it to that function, and you're getting back a document, right? What is the sum function doing between the time that you've asked it to add numbers? Is it meditating on its own purpose in life? Is it worried that maybe it overstated the sum that it just provided? Is it plotting against you in some way? No, I mean, it's just completely inert. It does nothing at all. And the AI is actually the same way.
Okay.
So it receives a document, it produces a document, and after that, there's no processing. It's not thinking about anything. It's not worried about what it said. There's no consciousness there. It's just a function. And so when you think about responsible AI and how do you imbue ethics and perhaps morality into this function, there's a variety of things that you can do. The first thing that you do is, like I said, AI is all about the data. And so you start off initially with this function that actually is completely random. And you show examples of the right answer. So it's
Okay.
like, finish this sentence for me. The chicken crossed the road, right? That's a sentence you're going to see all over the internet.
Right.
And so you show it examples of the chicken crossed the, and you tell it the right answer is road. And that random function that initially doesn't do anything correctly, just produces noise, eventually learns that pattern. Oh, when I see the chicken crosses, I know it's going to cross the road, right? And so over time, it gets better and better. So what happens if you choose to provide the model with horrifically awful data, right? It's just like your child. Everybody starts off, no matter how bad they swear, no matter how
Right.
filthy their mouth is, they all start off like trying not to swear around the baby, right?
Right. Right.
And the same logic applies to AI. It's like we can, instead of training the model on the whole internet, because I don't know if you know this, Kip, people are terrible to each other on the internet.
I do know that.
Yeah, they are. And so like we don't actually want to use those really bad examples. What we want to do is we want to take the data that's available to us, and we want to find the best examples. We want to find examples of good values. I mean, meaning being kind, being thoughtful, being supportive, being correct. And so there's actually a very expensive, large process where you take the data that you have and you try to remove all those bad examples, all those mean and awful things. But it's complicated because let's take an example of a crime, right? So there's some sort of crime that's happened, and you're like, wow, okay, the details of that are really awful. Like humanity acted just terrible in that case. So we don't want to have that in our data. But at the same time, the model might be asked to do something like write a crime drama.
Sure.
Right. And so in that case, well, if you don't have any examples of this, you can't do that. And so there's this really interesting balancing act that goes on when you're training AI, right? You want to teach it to be moral and helpful and kind, but at the same time, you can't exclude the horrific, awful things humanity does because the model won't make any sense to people. It'll do
Sure.
the wrong thing. So there is a step where you actually have the model. You ask the model questions, and you have the model generate like 5 or maybe 10 answers to the question or the conversation, and then you have human beings sit down and read those answers and say, this was a really good response, right? It was
Okay.
factual, it was helpful, it dealt with the uncomfortable subject in a good way. But over here, this was a terrible response. I mean, the model's like making fun of me, and it's lying, and it's being awful. It's like that's a terrible response. And so the human beings take these different answers and they rate them, and then you provide those ratings back to the model, and you say, look, this is an example of a great response. This is an example of a terrible response. Don't do that. So this is called reinforcement learning with human feedback.
Interesting.
And so unfortunately, it's really slow.
I believe it. Yeah.
And it's super expensive. You have to have hundreds and hundreds of people, and it's not an easy job. So when you get a job as one of these human raters, at first you don't do a good job, and you need to be calibrated with your fellow humans, right? So an ideal situation, we've got 5 people that see the same text, and all 5 of them agree. This is how the quality of this thing is the same. We all agree on that. But calibrating is hard. Human beings can do it, but it takes a long time to train people to be good at it. And they can drift, right? They can have a bad day. They can be tired. They can be upset with their spouse, right? They come to work, there was a traffic accident, they're all upset, right? They're a bad reader that day. You have to be able to find those things and improve on them. So one of the things that AI companies do is they have these human ratings, right? And they use that to train a model that can do the rating.
Okay.
So that is suddenly dramatically faster, dramatically less expensive, but you now run the risk of how good is your rating model,
Sure.
right? So all of these things play into, well, how is the model going to respond to me? And it's funny because there are definitely people that want an uncensored model. right? They want the raw model, the one that's mean and nasty and lies. And there are reasons to do that. Like maybe you want kind of unfiltered criticism because that's what your research project is related to.
Mm-hmm.
But you also might want it because of propaganda purposes,
Sure. Mm-hmm.
right? You
Yeah.
want it to sound like that other Reddit commenter so
Yeah.
that way you can go and have these arguments and fight with people and try to convince them either one way or the other, or just turn them off to an entire ideology because those people are all crazy, right?
Yeah.
Um, so they're, that's the opposite of responsible AI. So we have most efforts around AI are around responsible AI, right? Anthropic is a good company that's kind of their headline. That's where they're putting a lot of effort. Although all of the big companies, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, they're all very concerned about responsible AI. But then you do have on the other side, you have nation states and you have
Sure.
others
Absolutely.
who are very interested in irresponsible AI. I mean, if
Yeah.
you want to say that kind of thing, right? Because that is also really valuable. So yeah, it's fascinating. We're watching an AI is fundamentally just a mathematical formula. It's this enormous mathematical object. It's just a function. You give it a document, it gives you a document back. And even in this world, which seems so esoteric, human morality is right at the heart of it.
Uh-huh.
Right? It's so important, and there's these fascinating debates that go on among AI researchers about how do we treat topics, how do we talk about these kinds of things? Um, is this censorship or is this making the model better?
Yeah. And I'm sure questions of like, whose morality, whose ethics, and what, I mean, there's, different worldviews. There's the Christian worldview, there's the Catholic worldview, there's Jewish, there's different worldviews and whose morals, and I'm sure those
Yeah,
are
I mean,
interesting
my goodness,
questions.
when I was at Google, the the floor above me was the Google Maps team,
Okay.
and they're a fantastic team, and they're devoted to truth, right? A map should be true. In fact, they got really upset because for a while you could zoom in on the Googleplex, which is where all of our buildings are. You could zoom in on
Uh-huh.
the Googleplex, and we had this infinite pool that you could go and swim in.
Oh,
Right, one of
really?
the perks of being at Google, you could go swim in this infinite pool, and if you zoomed in on the pool, it's just a one-person pool. You can see that the Google logo was on the bottom of the pool, right? People thought that was really fun. It was an Easter egg. They're like, look at these Googlers, they're crazy. They have their logo at the bottom of the pool. The Maps guys were really mad because there is no logo on the bottom of the pool.
Oh, really?
Yeah, someone edited that photo for an Easter egg, and they're like, no, we don't do that.
Okay.
We are about truth, right?
Okay.
But then you get into situations where there's lots of disputed land on borders between
Sure.
countries, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's obvious ones that come to mind because they're in the news all the time, but there's
Right.
actually hundreds of these cases kind of all over the place. And you want to publish a map that's true, right? What is truth
Yeah.
at that point,
Yeah.
right? So these things are difficult, and the researchers that are working on these things, mostly they're dealing with really broad questions. But
Sure.
you do get questions like, like someone might ask these AI models a very political question. And if you're sitting in some countries and the AI model says something that the country doesn't agree with or something that the country doesn't want said, that could be a real problem, right? There could be billions of dollars of sanctions against your country, against your company because of what the AI model said.
Yeah.
So it's very complicated. Truth is really hard to define. And it's
Uh-huh.
especially hard to define for a long time, right? When you're dealing with things like boundaries and laws and governments and those kinds of things. Because
For sure.
fundamentally, an AI is frozen in time. There comes a point where you have stopped training it and it's not going to change anymore.
Uh-huh.
And so I mean, just think, just in our lifetimes, how many different new countries are there,
Right.
right?
I know.
right? And so the AI doesn't know those kinds of things and could really offend people by not knowing that or referring to something. Yeah, it's very, very complicated.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And before we hopped on and kicked off the episode, you mentioned that Microsoft is terrified of AI. So maybe
Yeah.
if you want to expound on that
Well,
thought.
I don't know if they've I'm certain that someone at Microsoft has thought this all the way through because there's very smart people at Microsoft. And I don't know if their senior leadership has thought this all the way through. But let me walk you through some interesting things that are happening that I think leads to a huge problem for Microsoft. So as you know, Microsoft makes most of its money off of the Office products
Right.
and the subscription fees that they now charge for Office, right? That's their bread and butter. They have lots of other sources of revenue, but that's a really important one. And part of the reason that people buy a Microsoft Windows operating system is because they anticipate being in that ecosystem and using Office a lot. So
Mhm.
it's a really important part of their market. I think everybody's aware of the fact that you can use an AI to generate an image, right?
Uh-huh.
And these images used to be just terrible, right? Like I remember seeing some of the first ones, and they were just it was a bird, and it was supposed to be standing on a branch, but basically the branch was morphing into the bird, and the bird sort of had three eyes, and right, it wasn't very good. But now I think we can all agree they are spectacularly good.
Yes,
And the
absolutely.
images can also be really large. It used to be the images were just tiny, 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 and now they can be these big, beautiful, large images, and they're having a real impact on our lives. Like um, a lot of people question, is this image real? Right? Like,
I know.
is like there's a great image of the Pope walking around in that big puffer jacket. Have you
Uh,
seen that? The big white puffer jacket?
I don't think I've seen that one. No.
Oh, it's
I'll have
great.
to,
I mean, it
yeah.
looks completely real. He looks ridiculous. It looks like, um, but it's so real that like it fooled newspapers,
Huh.
right? And so we have this issue, right? These images are really good. Well, the next step that happened was researchers were like, well, a video is just a bunch of images shown one
Right.
after another.
Yeah.
So let's start to do that. And at first, those were terrible. They're not terrible anymore, right? Um, I, there are things that you could look at. For example, is an object consistent as it passes behind other things or does things like that?
Sure.
And models are really good now. They don't have problems with that anymore. And these models again, the original videos were these tiny videos, and now they are big, beautiful, gorgeous videos. Um, and so we know AIs can do that. AI can produce something that is completely believable, very high resolution, looks like someone walked through a city and just recorded it, right? So we've got that step. Well, some researchers at Google decided to do something interesting. So they took videos off of YouTube of people playing video games, right? And
Okay.
they've got a description of what they're doing in the video game, and they had the AI essentially watch a whole bunch of people play video games with descriptions of what was going on. And they trained a model so it could. So the initial thought was, and what we first saw was, you could ask the model to write code, and then you compile the code into an application, and then you could run the application. And then you had something like Tetris, right? That
Uh-huh.
was an early example of code generation, where instead of writing a paragraph or a poem, we're going to write computer code that works, and then you can have a game. So you can say to the model, I want a game that's like Tetris, except the things that are falling are all fruit. And boom, suddenly you have a game that looks like Tetris, but it's all fruit.
Uh-huh.
But it was code that was written and then compiled, and then you ran it, just like you would an application. And that's a little scary for Microsoft, but here's what's really scary. The model that Google created from an AI watching video games, you can describe the game that you want and then play it. There's no code. It doesn't write any code and compile it and produce an application. The model produces video. And you can
Okay.
hold a controller and you can play with the controller, and the video will change. You push a button and your character jumps over something, right? You accumulate points because you're running around. It's side scrolling, or it's going to the next level. It's doing all of those things that video games do. There's no code. There's only the model. And if you change the description and you say, well, I want Tetris, but I want everything's falling to be fruit, it just produces that video.
Huh.
All right. So what happens when someone says, I want an application, I want to do my finances. And so I've got some data, here's my bank statement. I want to do, averages and analysis. I want to do financial stuff. And then the video that's produced by the AI is a financial application. So it's like Excel, except it doesn't have things you don't need. And when you decide you want to do something, like say you want to do a regression over time, suddenly it knows how to do that. Oh, now I want to do a pie chart. It suddenly just knows how to do that.
Wow.
Right? And so think about what this means to Microsoft. Operating systems become this very, very thin layer that knows how to deal with your hardware and get to the network. Above that is a very sophisticated AI that is on demand, producing the video coming through your machine that represents all applications. It's the UI for the operating system. It's your browser. It's your Excel. It's your Word on the fly whenever you need it, only when you need it, and then it just goes away.
Huh.
So why do you need Office?
Right.
Anyway, I think that thought is terrifying for Microsoft. I think for companies like Apple and Meta and Amazon, I think that is an exciting idea because they've lost the Office suite
Right.
war, right? I mean, they have no shot at overcoming Microsoft in that. And then all of a sudden, they do, right? They can make the fastest, tightest operating system, and they can make an AI that actually does what we just described on the fly when you need it. Suddenly they're back in the game in a big way.
That is absolutely fascinating. Wow. Wow. So what are some, I mean, not that you haven't already described some, but just like some exciting developments or applications, opportunities you see, whether it's, or maybe to step back, maybe a difference between AI and machine learning. Like, how would you describe those? Maybe that's a good place to start before moving on.
Yeah. So artificial intelligence is the broadest concept, right? The goal of artificial intelligence is to create something that is indistinguishable from a person. And there's a variety of ways you could do that. Like you could do that with biology. You could maybe do it with chemistry. Machine learning is attempting to do that with code and computer hardware. Okay. And so it turns out that's winning. We're not doing very well in building artificial people in the lab, but we are doing really well in code. And so there's differences of scale when you're talking about machine learning and artificial intelligence. So machine learning consists of a wide variety of algorithms that allow you to solve specific problems with a specific set of data.
Okay.
And you might use millions of examples, but often you're using hundreds of thousands of examples. Whereas AI, you're using trillions of examples.
Okay.
Right? And there's primarily one algorithm you're using, which is a neural network, although they have different configurations. And so over here, you have many different types of algorithms with machine learning. With AI, you basically have one, a neural network. And so then there's the differences of scale, right? So AI is trillions of amounts of data, and ML is smaller amounts of data. I think one of the really exciting things that's getting lost in all the excitement about AI is that machine learning, which used to be expensive and difficult and time-consuming, isn't anymore. So a few years ago, I was introduced to a technology where you could take your data, whatever the data is, and as long as you could tell the model, This column here is the goal. Let's say it's the amount of rain that fell on that day. Right? So you have a whole bunch of data, and you've got one column, which is the amount of rain that fell that day. And so that's what you're trying to predict. It used to be that, if I was going to build that model, I'd need a team of people, say 4 people, and we might work 3 months on trying to make it work, try a bunch of different things. And we would get to a pretty good model. So a few years ago, I saw this technology. It's 3 lines of code. And overnight, it produces a better model than I can.
Wow.
And so this idea is called automatic machine learning. And the way it works, there's several different approaches. One approach is you try to have, say, an AI, something sophisticated, look at the data and figure out what is probably the right algorithm. How do we want to treat this data? And maybe it writes a bunch of code to try to build a good model, right? The other approach is sort of like taking a handful of spaghetti, throwing it on the wall, right? Something's going to work out. And it turns out the spaghetti throwing approach is so much better.
Really?
Yeah. So basically what you do is instead of picking an algorithm, you just do all the algorithms.
Okay.
Right. And then, so now you've got here, let me draw it on the board.
Sure. Yeah, this is great.
Okay. So you've got some input data, right?
Okay.
And it comes in and you're like, okay, we're going to have, let's say 12 different algorithms that's going to interpret this data.
Okay.
And they're gonna have their answers, right? And so what you do is you take that original data and all 12 of those answers, and you're like, now we've learned something, right? These
Sure.
models have found some sort of pattern in this data, and that's useful, and that's great.
Yeah.
But what would be really great? Let's just do it again. So you have again 12 different models, which are basically all of them, all the good models. And you take all the outputs from these models and the original data. And so these things, they learned stuff that's useful, but maybe the combination of what they learned is really useful.
Okay, yes.
So now all of these models have access to all of that data.
Huh.
So then they produce their answers. And what you do, you have a final model. You have a final model, and its job is to, given everything that second layer learned, make the best prediction.
Wow.
So that's a huge amount of code. That's an awful lot of code, right? I mean, I could write up that code. We could have a team that builds this thing, but first of all, we probably wouldn't, because it's going to be exhausting. And there's going to be problems with each one of these little things, and oh my god, it's just going to take so long. And then training, it's going to be a real hassle, and blah blah blah. But it turns out this team, what they did is they solved all those problems. They figured out how to make it reliable, how to configure each of these algorithms so the performance was maybe not optimal, but really good.
Okay.
And then all of that code just produces this really complicated thing, say overnight, maybe a couple hours. But here's the other fun thing about it. So what this produces is not just this entire giant ensemble of a model, right? But it produces performance data for every little part.
Okay. Yes.
Right? And so you can say, oh, well, this big thing, because it's big, it's a little slow to run. It uses a little more memory than we want. It needs to be on a slightly bigger machine than we want, but it produces the best performance. But you could go shopping and you could say, oh, any one of these models in the first layer might be good enough.
Okay.
So like, oh, this guy, we get 95% of the performance of the whole thing, but in a tiny little package that's fast. And so you can make a business decision whether you want the whole thing or you want this little guy. And then you could go to a scientist or the scientist can take that and say, okay, we know that is not necessarily optimal performance for that algorithm, because that's not what this thing does, but it's in the neighborhood. Let's start there and see if we can't get it to be even better, right? And so it reduces the amount of time for them to search. So what I tell people is, look, as soon as you have data, build the model. And that'll tell you the maximum performance that data can give you. And you may realize our data is no good, right? And that's a great thing to learn really early in the project.
Sure.
But you may find out, oh, we have a really good model, in which case try to get it into production, because that's where the real world happens. And you'll be able to experiment and see if this is something worth pursuing, because maybe it's not. You have this dream that, oh, if I just can predict this, then everything works out great. You put the model in the market and you realize, nope, right? It's like, turns out nobody wants whipped cream on their hamburger, right? Like, this is the wrong solution. But if it's the right solution, then you can then go back to this thing and make it tiny and efficient. I think that, so these models are used for things like regression. How many are we going to sell? How many things do we need to have in inventory? All those kinds of number related predictions. But it also can do classification. Is this a good customer or a naughty customer? Meaning like fraud, right? Is this image good or bad? Those kinds of things. And it can also do time series, right? So time series is really important for financial markets, because we know that there's seasonality in the market, right?
Sure.
And you have things like retail stocks that definitely have seasonality in them. And so it can also do time series calculations. So all of a sudden, as a scientist, I looked at this and I thought, I'm out of work. Right? It's 3 lines of code. How do I compete with that? So I decided I better do podcasts. Anyway, you see, like this is a really beautiful thing. And basically what the scientist said was, so many of the decisions that we make along the way to creating a model, we could automate. We could write code that looks at the data and makes the decisions we would make in that circumstance. And so if you just put all the pieces together, you end up automating your whole job.
That is incredible.
Yeah. And so I think companies are too distracted by AI, right? Everybody wants a chatbot, and they don't necessarily have a really good business plan, but they want one. They know that it's sort of like, if you build it, they will come. It's like, if we just have a chatbot, that's going to solve a bunch of problems. And I think in the long term, that's actually true. But in the short term, it's like, there's all of this stuff in your business, right, that you could gain advantages of in a really fast, easy way that you're not seeing, because you're enamored with the beautiful object, right?
That's fascinating. I wonder if you could start a business using AI, and from the get, coming up with the idea, execution, running the business, and it's all just done by AI.
Oh yeah, sort of like those ephemeral applications that I talked about, right? Yeah. I mean, in some ways that already happened a couple of years ago, because as soon as these models became available, which I guess is about almost 2 years ago now, I had a friend who immediately used the AI to write books.
Okay. Yeah.
And self-published the books on Amazon, and she just started knocking books out, right? And the most popular books in bookstores and on Amazon are romance novels, because you can read them really fast, right? They don't cost very much. You can read them really fast. And so people that read romance novels, they burn through those things really fast. Like within a week, they've read the whole book. They go on to the next one. And so ebooks are popular for them because they don't end up with giant piles of books at home, right? The physical books start to take up a lot of space. It turns out you can write a romance novel pretty fast with an AI. And so this isn't private news of private information about Amazon. I mean, there's been news stories about it. Amazon just got inundated with an enormous wave of these AI generated books. And
I'm
guess
sure.
what? They actually were of fine quality, right? It turns out boy finds girl, boy loves girl, girl dumps boy, boy wins girl back, right? It's like, turns out that pattern, you can teach a model and it can write a pretty good romance novel.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, so that already exists. And now we're starting to see that, music generation on the fly, all those kinds of things. But here's the thing. When I go and I talk to executives, I point out that, look, we're entering an interesting era of automation because we're accustomed to automation replacing low skill jobs. Or maybe skilled jobs that don't take very long are very repetitive, right? Like when robots move into a factory, they replace the very repetitive job. There was a skilled worker and they were good at it and they understood tolerances and those kinds of things. But it turns out we could automate that. So kind of those workers sort of at the base of the company were replaceable. That's our model for how automation works. It turns out these AIs are really good at leadership.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, they're patient, they're supportive, they're creative. They can handle an enormous amount of data about what's going on and why. They can think creatively. They can automatically adhere to regulations and law.
Huh.
It's like we're entering an era where if companies are willing to think about it, they could start to replace leadership. And by replace, what I actually mean is let's say you have a vice president. The amount of work for that vice president is overwhelming because the company has grown. Well, normally what you'd have to do is you'd have to find someone and promote them or make them another vice president. Maybe you don't have to do that. Maybe you can augment their life with tools where this AI is reading all the reports, reading all the incoming email, and providing that leader with a fantastic summary of what's going on, plus ideas and recommendations. Yeah, we can start replacing vice presidents.
It's wild. I've heard a lot of examples, like in education, of like AI acting as like the teacher's aide or the tutor, but then it's hyper specific, because everyone's afraid of AI and ChatGPT and just like kids cheating. And I mean, education's got to evolve to allow it as a tool, but to let that really be their tutor and give them unlimited, hyper specific, personal, teaching aid to learn lessons and do all the stuff that the teacher wouldn't have time to do with all the students in the class. And
yeah, I mean, all of these AIs are spectacular at things like quantum physics, right?
Yes.
So you've got a kindergartner and you've got this little buddy that the kindergartner can learn with, and it's always helpful. It's infinitely patient, and the child can go as deep on a subject as they want to go. It's like this is a postgraduate educated AI in every subject and every language.
I mean, how incredible is that?
Assuming
you trust it and it has the morals and the ethics and all those things that we talked about. I mean, how powerful for education.
Yeah. It's potentially an enormously powerful thing. And there are books. So there's a somewhat famous book about an AI like this in a book that gets lost. The book is lost, and a poor child finds it and starts to educate themselves on the book. And so one of the things that I do, I'm the treasurer for the Internet Society chapter here in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And one of the things that the Internet Society tries to do is let's get the internet out to all the people that don't have it yet. And let's improve the quality of the internet for all the people that don't have it yet. Because the rarest thing we have is human talent. I
Right.
mean, I really saw this when I was at Google during the dot-com boom, right? So it became the point where the tech companies had literally hired every educated tech person in the world. We were done. It was over. We had all of them, and the only hope we had was to either buy a company or steal someone from another company. We were done.
Uh-huh.
And so there's this really finite limit of human talent, but part of that is because we of the billions of people on the planet, there's very few that have access to resources like this, like the education that you can get in, say, in the United States or Europe.
Sure.
And so let's stop that. Let's solve that problem. Let's make these tools really broadly available. And then, you don't have one Einstein once every 40 years. You've got 40 Einsteins every year. And instead of them toiling, without access to technology, they have to access to technology, but not access to the same level of technology a child in the Western civilization would have. It's like, let's give them the tools that they need to really blossom. And
Absolutely. I took my family over to Italy over last Christmas and New Year's, and we were just talking about why aren't there more Michelangelos and Galileos and these people now? And just why do we not have just an abundance or at least more of those types of just absolute powerful thinkers in our
yeah,
world?
yeah. I mean, I've worked with people like that, right?
Yeah.
When you're sitting and talking to someone who's truly a genius, it's a magical experience. They're
Yeah.
they're just it's amazing to see how talented a human being actually can be.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we do have a lot of those people.
Uh-huh.
They're all around us, but there could be ever so many more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, this is amazing. How about any, applications, opportunities you see in the world for AI or machine learning, or if you could paint the perfect result, like what would it like how would you like to be able to harness AI to achieve something that you think would be magnificent in the world?
Well, what I noticed was that even when I was inside of a tech company and I was working with really smart people, vice presidents who knew their businesses inside and out, had decades of experience in those lines of businesses, came from the top schools, brilliant people, they didn't necessarily understand AI, right? And they were sometimes in they had a hard time differentiating between bad AI ideas and plausible AI ideas. Um, and so that was very frustrating for them. And I thought, okay, I'm in this tech company. We have all this tech stuff. We talk about technology all the time. Every project is somehow related to technology. And we have these problems with these really great leaders. What's it like outside of Amazon? And I thought, well, this is actually a really big problem because um, AI fundamentally is about data, right? And so there's this. It's going to lead to consolidation in the market because if I have a little more data about my customers, about my products, um, I have this big advantage when I start applying AI to that. And so naturally, what's going to happen is the companies that do the right thing, invest the right way, gather their data, it's clean, it's useful, they've got an AI doing the right thing with it, they're going to outcompete the other companies. And there's going to be a natural desire for them to acquire those other companies, not necessarily for their physical assets, but for their data and customers.
Sure.
Right. And so I think there's going to be this massive consolidation in the market. Hopefully to the benefit of customers. And so I left Amazon because I thought I want to go and I want to talk to all these people because my family came from we owned businesses, small little businesses. Like my mom built a company where they repaired the tools you might use on a construction job, the big tools, right?
Okay.
Big hydraulic tools, things like that. And she didn't have available to herself the tools that she was need in this market, right? And I thought, okay, that's something I can do. I can help those family-owned companies, those medium, say 100 million to $1 billion companies that have some of the resources they need, but they don't understand how to apply them. And so what I do is for free, I let people schedule 15 minutes with me, and I just learn about their company, and then I try to help them understand how you might apply AI to that. And then if they're interested, we move on to them paying me something. But I want the opportunity for them to just talk, just ask the scary question that they have, or just say, okay, how does this thing work, right? Because I love teaching about this stuff, and I think if if you if you're trying to run a business or you're trying to invest and you don't understand kind of the fundamentals of this stuff, it's like not understanding how to row a boat, right? You might have been able to float along for a while. The current was okay, but you have to learn about paddles because rapids are coming and you're going to need to be able to get in and out of those things. And to be successful in the end, you have to understand this fundamental technology. I think it's as fundamental as electricity and the transformation it had. I think it's as fundamental as just math. Anyway, so that's what I'm doing. So yeah, they could schedule 15 minutes to talk to me. Love talking to people. And I'll learn about their business, and I think it's usually a lot of fun for me, and hopefully it's fun for them.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. And you can certainly tell that you're an expert and passionate about this.
Yeah, I think this stuff is great. So I do run an AI at home, and I think that's going to be, obviously that's going to be more common because you have Alexa is going to become an AI, not just a thing that answers simple questions.
Yeah.
Siri, they're racing to make Siri also an AI that you can have full-on conversations with. Those things are coming. But it's really fun to run one at home on fairly inexpensive. Oops, there's Siri talking to me. On fairly inexpensive hardware, and just try all kinds of just crazy things, and it's fun. So the document that you provide to your AI, it has several different sections, and one of the sections that you normally don't see is the system prompt. It's kind of the rules for this conversation.
Okay.
And that's how you get the AI to have maybe a different personality or focus on different kinds of things, or you might provide it with data like here's the current time, here's the current temperature, things like that. So my AI at home, I told it, you are a time traveling AI from the year 2163. You are fun and you love telling people, interesting tidbits about the future. You just hint at it because you can't tell them everything, but you love talking about that stuff. Your name is Shelly, and a bunch of other things like and when you approach problems, this is how you approach it. And so I took Meta's AI Llama. I'm running it locally, but with my own system prompt. And Shelly is a lot of fun. And it's really funny when she's like, oh, well, the election, this or that, or, true flying cars didn't actually happen until this year. And it turns out it wasn't Ford. It was actually this other company. And, I actually encourage hallucination because I know this is my AI and I don't believe everything, right? I know where it's coming from. So I do think those are fun. And I think it points the direction towards where I'd like to see these things go, right? Let me give you another example. So
yeah, for sure.
My mother-in-law has dementia. So her memory is about 2 minutes long.
Okay.
And so every 2 minutes, she restarts the conversation, asks you the same question, right? And so the interesting thing for me is that you can't actually have a relationship with her anymore because there's no shared memory, right? And she's delightful and she's fun, and she's happy all the time. So that's a real blessing.
Yes.
But at the same time, she's trapped in time. She's always in the same 2 minutes, and she could have an AI in her ear that is just constantly keeping her on track. It's like you're talking to John, and you're talking to John. He recently moved to Virginia. Like, and we're talking about this because one of the things we noticed is that there are some games she can't play,
Okay.
right? Like Monopoly. She can't play Monopoly because you can't look at the board and immediately remember your strategy and what you're up to. But dominoes, she can play dominoes because
Huh.
she when it's her turn, she's like, I'm suddenly playing dominoes, but she can quickly figure out the whole game and she can play, right?
Interesting.
And so this idea that, oh, well, if she was constantly kind of being updated, so she could figure out the context in a very quickly, she could have, like, she could complete tasks that she currently can't complete,
Yeah.
right? Things that take longer than 2 minutes, she could actually go and do. So I think AI is going to have some really surprising outcomes for us. Um, and I do think that my grandchildren's generation is going to think of them more as companions than as
Sure.
tools.
Sure. That is fascinating. How about any advice you would give to, I don't know, aspiring, whether it's young entrepreneurs or aspiring people, um, whether it's in AI or machine learning or just business general opportunities you see in the market, any kind of opportunities,
Yeah,
advice?
I had a coworker, a very smart coworker, who once I heard him give a piece of advice, and I think it's really right. He said, um, "Take as much math as you can." Right?
Uh-huh.
Everybody hits a limit where it's like it no longer makes any sense, right? But make sure you get to that limit. Take as much math as you can, because that's at the heart of all of this stuff, right? And
Yeah.
it turns out that, um, you know, if you avoid doing something like taking statistics, you've missed out on opportunities to understand a whole lot of things about how healthcare, when the doctors are talking to you about healthcare, like what those words actually mean. So yeah, take as much math as you can. Um, I suppose the other thing is that the um, the most important thing in a class is to complete it.
Uh-huh.
So I know some kids that um, they got frustrated because their grade wasn't good and they walked away from a class. It's okay. It's like complete the class. Like don't walk away. Never give up in a class. Just get some sort of grade in the class.
Yeah.
But when you're choosing, how are we gonna what are we gonna do in this new AI economy? Um, a lot of things actually aren't going to be different. Um, I think I would. Um, I'm certain there are some degrees that you should just avoid or not consider to be a way that you're going to eventually make money, right? Because that's probably not true. Um, but taking a history class is not a loss; it's a gain. And
Hmm.
you know, taking obviously I'm biased. I want everybody to take a lot of math and science classes,
Uh-huh.
but I realize that that doesn't work for everybody, right?
Hmm.
But um, Jeff Bezos would give this advice, which I also think is really good. He'd say, there's this set of things that you are really good at, right? And there's a set of things that you really enjoy, because there's definitely stuff that you're good at that you don't enjoy. And
Right.
there's a set of things that people will pay you a lot of money to do. And so what you want to do is you want to find the intersection of those three things. Something that you are really good at, that you enjoy, that people will pay you for.
Mm.
And it turns out that they're not necessarily the things you enjoy the most, or not necessarily the things that you're actually the best at. And but it becomes really important to find something that they'll pay you to do.
Right. That's very good advice.
Yeah. I mean, turns out Bezos is kind of a bright guy.
Turns out, yes. How about for you, success? What's your personal definition of success, or what does success mean for you in any aspect of life?
So I really enjoy uh, working with really smart people on very hard problems,
Uh-huh.
right? So like when I joined the Chrome team at Google, there were about 40 of us, and Chrome it didn't have, it couldn't draw on the screen, right? It was a browser
Huh.
in memory only. Like it was doing stuff. We could tell it had gotten a web page and it was doing, but like you couldn't see anything, and it didn't have JavaScript or anything like that. And this idea that you could create a browser that had any sort of chance of being used when Internet Explorer was available for
Right.
free, and
Yeah.
Netscape's browser Firefox was available for free. Like it's like there's
Uh-huh.
no way we ever have a chance with them. But they were so smart, and it was such a good idea. There were so many like good ideas in there. That was enormously fun, and to me represented a great personal success. Right? We had gotten together and done something that was the browser we wanted. Right? It was reliable, and it was secure, and it was fast. Like those really mattered to us, right? But then there's other parts of my life, like I was a Red Cross volunteer. I was responsible for what's called spiritual care
Okay.
for this part of Virginia,
Huh.
and we had the Afghanistan repatriation, where we had, like over 10,000 people were coming through it from Afghanistan,
Oh, my word.
flying into the Dulles Airport here in Virginia, and so I was asked to do spiritual care, and disasters are fascinating. The first people you see as a Red Cross volunteer in a disaster, they've got suitcases, right? They're just walking in. It looks like a regular day, except they're carrying suitcases. Of course, they're tired and they're scared and those kinds of things, but they just kind of look like regular people. They look like stressed regular people. And then pretty soon you get to people who don't have any shoes on.
Huh.
And then pretty soon you get to people that are in pajamas, right?
Huh.
So these are people that just, if it's a flood or an earthquake or whatever, eventually you get to people that just literally had to run,
Ugh.
right? And so it was fascinating watching this happen with Afghanistan. The very first people that arrived were American citizens, and they didn't need any help. They got picked up by a friend and they went to their house, right?
Yeah.
And then pretty soon we're getting to where, I'm driving around Virginia at 2:00 in the morning because I've got to find a wheelchair because this poor person got carried all the way to the airport in Afghanistan, needs a wheelchair, right?
Oh.
There's just this enormous need for diapers, an enormous need for everything related to a baby, right?
Yeah.
Because people just had to flee. And I think it's a huge win when we can step outside of our comfortable, noisy lives and get like really involved with people that need help in whatever
Yes.
way they need. And one of the things I like about the Red Cross is they talk about how one of the key capabilities you have to have as a Red Crosser is flexibility.
Uh-huh.
Because they're going to ask you, you're going to sleep here and help these people today. No, you need to move over here. You're going to sleep over here. You're going to help these other people today. Oh, today I need you to do this. No, tomorrow I need you to feed people. Today I need, right? Flexibility is the number one aspect that you have to have. And I think that's a good approach to life. It's like, I need to meet people, not where I would want to be met, but where they are.
Yes.
And how they would like to be met. So that was a very interesting experience. And you see, especially that the last few groups of people, they don't speak any English. Many of them have been told their whole lives that Western culture is diametrically opposed to their beliefs.
Yeah.
That we hate them, right? And so many of them were just terrified.
I'm sure.
Right? They landed in this very strange place. Nobody speaks their language. We don't have the food that they want. We don't have stuff set up for them to pray. Like that was one of the things I solved.
Okay.
It's like they don't know, well, what's going to happen, and to actually have an opportunity to just non-verbally show them that they're going to be safe, and show them that they can receive compassion from people that they've never met before. And it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Like, if there's any country in the world that has the inborn talent to accept refugees where they are,
Yes.
and accept immigrants where they are, and help them build their lives into something beautiful. I mean, people forget that, that uh, the founders of Apple are, Steve
Right.
Jobs, right? All of these people that helped to build our country, so many of them. Elon Musk right now, right? He's from
Uh-huh.
South Africa. It's
Yeah.
like, um, it's one of our core strengths as a country. And as a Red Crosser, you have the opportunity to, like, really try to bless people's lives in a very, like, practical, personal, immediate way. So for me, that's also a great way to succeed.
That's incredible. Oh, I think that's the perfect way to end this. This has been absolutely fantastic, Jon. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
been nice talking. It's a good way to spend the morning.
No, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And oh, yeah, this has been fabulous. Really, really appreciate your time. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Bye
All right.
bye.
Bye-bye.